All right, good evening, everybody, and happy Monday night. We hope you are staying safe wherever you are during this COVID-19 pandemic. It's Monday, so what does that mean? Oh, wow, I'm reflecting here. All right, let me start over again. Hello, Albert's List, and welcome. It is Monday night, and so that means we're doing another mock interview. I hope you're having a safe week out there amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. It's Monday, so we're here, and back with us is Cory Hiromoto. He's a Fortune 5 recruiter and the founder of CareerShakers.com. He's also a Santa Clara graduate, former management consultant, and also from the great state of Hawaii. With him is Colin Mo, a creative writer and learning and development professional based here in Silicon Valley. He'll be interviewing here, pretend interviewing, mock interviewing for a senior copywriter role. And the rules of today's live video are pretty simple. I'm going to step back in a quick moment to let Cory and Colin do their work. You'll see Colin's resume live on screen as you do right now with the job that he wants to apply for, and Cory will ask the tough questions and put him in the hot seat. I'll return when the webinar is just about to conclude, and in the meantime, all of you can provide the feedback and the questions that you have around what it means to be a really good interviewer. Cory, I'm going to give it over to you, and Colin, best of luck.
Thank you, Albert. Appreciate everyone tuning in on another busy Monday evening. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, basically Colin and I will do like a practice interview session. I'll give him feedback after every single answer, and then I'll also be doing my best to check the chat on my other computer here to see if there's any questions or comments or things that you guys want us to address. So hopefully as we get started, we'll wait for a few people to probably log in and join in, but I'll probably just run through a quick little introduction, and hopefully we can give and show Colin some love and support for being so brave and putting him out there in front of all of you for a really valuable learning experience. This is week, I believe, 5 of the mock interview sessions. Let me just mute myself on this other computer. For those of you who were curious about what other topics we've covered in the past, if you want to get some tips and tricks when you're preparing for your next interview, we covered how to address gaps in employment, frequent job changes, moving from an individual contributor to becoming a manager, moving in and out of nonprofit work, and the other week we just talked to a recent college grad. So if any of those situations apply to you, feel free to check out our previous recordings on Albert's List. And now I will kick it over to Colin to give himself a quick little introduction. And it doesn't need to be his like tell me about yourself answer. It's just much more informal, just to give you guys some background and context about him. I'll have his resume up here in the background, and I'll be jumping back and forth between his job description here, which is a senior copywriter role for Crunchyroll. But this is Colin's chance to give himself a little plug and see if he has any questions or requests from the community.
Hey all, this is probably my first time doing this for Albert, even though we're great friends. But yeah, this is me putting myself out there as someone who's been sort of working creatively in the tech industry, which is kind of interesting for several years right now. When I'm not busy being a creative writer slash technical writer slash creative manager for my current company, I'm either trying to force myself to push out a book or reading books because you don't get better at writing without reading, apparently. So, and that's me in a nutshell. Back to
That's
Cory.
awesome. What types of books are you planning on writing or publishing?
I am currently writing. Oh wow. Like I'm sort of like a very experimental writer, so I try to break the rules of what I think are normal. I'm currently writing um a dynasty sort of high fantasy story um,
Hmm.
based on my Western upbringing but Asian roots, and it's something that I think feels a little niche that doesn't really exist currently in the sort of pleasure reading high fantasy sort of genre, and I'm trying to lean heavily in towards the Western and Eastern blend of storytelling.
Nice. And it kind of combines his well, as you can see, or as I saw on his resume, his bachelor's degree is in foreign language literature. So it actually pairs nicely with what he does for a living as a writer. So that's really cool. Everyone in the community, stay tuned for what what may be coming next from Colin. So that's super exciting.
It's hard to push out a book, man. It's just like it's something that's like you just have to push yourself to do it. There's so much resistance, and every day your brain is like, here's 10 more excuses not to write another sentence, and you just have to just do it, and it's hard.
Yes. Yeah, very, very true. And I guess for any of you who may be in the same industry or looking for the same types of roles as Colin, feel free to especially comment down in the section below. Everyone can help each other kind of find roles and jobs in the creative content slash marketing slash technical writing field. And yeah, that'll be a great little plug. And if you know any company or any teams that are hiring, feel free to reach out to either of us as well, and we'll be happy to pass along those resources. So looks like we got a good amount of people tuned in here. Awesome. Everyone's saying hello, hello, hello. All right. So thank you again, Colin, for your bravery and your service. We will begin the mock interview session here. And for those of you following along, I'll be jumping back and forth between this job description as well as Colin's resume. And I did craft certain questions specifically around the job description itself. I am not a copywriter by trade, nor do I recruit for this role normally. So I will not be asking any technical or like skill-based questions. So that way, everyone at home who is obviously not a copywriter, you can still learn some things from our practice interview today. So, Colin, are you ready?
Sure, let's do this.
Let's do this. So, the most famous question in the world, of course, is, so Colin, thank you for applying for my senior copywriter role here at Crunchyroll. Why don't you tell me about yourself?
I am currently a creative manager. The official title is creative content lead at eDriving, a risk management solutions for driver safety and education company. My department is e-learning, and my skills and responsibilities basically form together to push out e-learning product sold by our company to drivers, fleet companies, and giant companies that have to deal with logistics around the globe to make sure that at the end of the day, people get home safely and in a way that makes them not have long-term health issues. Yep, that's what I do as a whole. Does that sort of,
Okay.
would you like to ask me anything about it?
Yes. So, why are you interested in applying for our role here at Crunchyroll?
Okay, so I've been at my role for almost 3 years now, and as some people in the tech industry would say, that's forever. But for me, it is feeling like I am learning. I've hit the gap where I've stopped learning at work. Um, Obviously, at work, everything's very fast paced. The first year uh, that I worked for the company is very, very different from my current responsibilities for the company. And I'm currently looking to see whether or not I want to move into a different industry, learn some different things, because ultimately, writing is about re explaining to other people what you yourself have learned. And I have learned as much about driving as I really want to learn currently.
Mhm.
And that's why I'm currently looking for other industries.
Okay, good. So we will pause the practice scenario there. Each answer for Colin was about a minute or a little bit less, which is totally fine. Actually, that's the perfect amount of, I would say, length you want to be for these like warm up slash research based questions. You're not supposed to go too long, but also you need to give a little bit of introduction and background and context about yourself. Now, for the tell me about yourself question, I think it's really good to always kind of walk them through what you're doing, as long as it relates to the role itself. It would have been good if there was information perhaps that was not readily available on Colin's resume. He was pointing out what his current role is, how long he's been working there, and also some of his responsibilities, which would translate over into this role, which is great. But also learning a little bit more, maybe what's not captured on the resume, or what helps him stand out as a creative manager, or one of his pieces that would be really relevant for what a company like Crunchyroll would be looking for. And then for the second question about why would you want to come and work at this company, um, what I have noticed from people answering this question is there's a very common theme, and it's always like being very literal with the question, and that's just a natural tendency whenever someone asks you something. But in the form of an interview, the the main purpose of the question is really to understand what you can help the company to achieve, as opposed to what we as in Crunchyroll or we as in the manager can give you. So you would want to avoid questions that are or answers that are more centered around yourself, right? What you can gain or what you are missing in your current role and what you can get from joining another company or that type of stuff. Even though it may be true, what you would want to do is kind of flip the question around and talk a little bit about like what you can bring to Crunchyroll, and also show a little bit of your research about the company itself and why you're so excited to come and join. Maybe it's the products, or it's the mission, or the values, or you heard really something great about their creative director, something like that, right? And the good news is, when you're applying for a company that has a very tangible and easy to understand product like Crunchyroll, for those of you who don't know, it is I guess it's like an anime website where you can go and watch and read different mangas and anime. And so I feel like there's a lot of really rich and great content you can pull into your why do you want to work here type answer. Does any of those tips or things kind of make sense or resonate with you, Colin?
Oh yeah, unbelievably. That is something that I felt like I knew but never put into practice, and that's one of my biggest problems with interacting with people as a natural born introvert.
Oh, no worries, no worries.
Yeah.
But that's why we're here. We're still here to learn. And if your main driver for changing companies is to learn, it's totally something okay to kind of bring up. I would say maybe a little bit later on in the interview, right? Like if you're given the opportunity to ask questions, for example, at the end, maybe your questions are more geared around like, what types of learning opportunities do you normally provide to, people who work at Crunchyroll, or what is your stance on learning and development, right? That would be a really great way for you to kind of assess and feel out if a company would be willing to invest in your development over time, as opposed to just saying, I'm not learning anything anymore and I want to go to a different place. Even though it's probably true, right? That's it. I think that's inherently why most people leave companies. That's not what a interviewer would be looking for per se.
Okay, yeah. That works. That makes sense. And I now have a better idea of what I should be focusing on. Thank you.
No problem. Do you want to try and answer the question again?
The first one or the second one?
The second one.
Okay. Why do I want to apply for this role, right?
Hmm. Or why do you want to work at Crunchyroll?
So Crunchyroll is taking a very interesting initiative in the Western Hemisphere with regards to how they're approaching the market and audience base for uh, essentially anime manga consumption. And I think I want to be part of that. I grew up with anime. I'm very passionate about it, and it's been a big part of the culture I grew up in. And now that I have the skills to essentially be able to sort of bring it to the mainstream, I want to be able to do that and be able to show, hey, the world that this is a medium that I really enjoy and bring it to the forefront. Is that a better answer?
Yeah, that is much better. That's awesome. And I think one thing that you can totally pull on as well, right, which is what we kind of talked about at the beginning of this, is your educational background, right? It actually kind of matches perfectly to what you were trying to allude to at the beginning of your statement, right? Crunchyroll is basically trying to fulfill this interesting niche, right? And you actually have a background in both technical writing as well as foreign language and literature, which pairs perfectly with what Crunchyroll is trying to do. So I think you could weave that into your story as well. And also, what I would have loved to hear too is when you said, I want to bring my skills to Crunchyroll, right? Just touch a little bit on, what type of specific skills those are that they may be looking for in this particular role that can actually help bring Crunchyroll to the forefront. That would have been really good too.
Oh, yes. Okay, definitely.
Yeah, because I think one key theme for a lot of the folks who are practicing, it's showing rather than just telling, right? Like I would love to bring my skills. my skills. For example, blah, 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 blah. Or for example, there was this time where I did this project where blah, 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 right?
Mhm.
It's cool. So let's just check the chat here and see if anyone is coming. Oh, Albert is also giving some great tips in here too.
Albert always gives great tips.
Yeah. Aiko says, I love Crunchyroll. It's like the Netflix of Japan. Yes, that's great. Okay. Thank you everyone for your comments and chats. We will be checking live to see if there is any other questions that come through. Okay. So, next question. Are you ready, Colin?
Let's go.
All right. Now, for those of you who are following along at home, I'm asking this question, this next question, in a much more direct fashion than I'm sure Colin's interviewer would actually ask him, but this may be applicable to a lot of you. So, Colin, for this role, right, we are looking for a senior copywriter, and a lot of our activities or a lot of the responsibilities that this copywriter will have is related to marketing and branding for us as a company. On your resume, it does seem like your writing experience is focused a little bit more in like instructional design as well as technical writing. How does your experience match up with kind of what we're looking for here in this role?
The question is, how does my experience as a e-learning product creative manager fit me for the marketing and product role?
That's right.
Okay. Let's see. The role itself is marketing and very product oriented. Looking at the role's requirements, the marketing team is looking for um, a copywriter that can help with extending audience engagement, drives revenue. The product team is looking for someone to sort of be part of the user experience. So essentially, most likely, writing copy for the website. The reason why I think I'm going to be a great fit for that is because as an e-learning designer, user experience is at the very core of what I have to consider when I am essentially designing a way to leave sort of this course that's designed to teach someone else where I won't be able to interact with them. So at the very forefront of everything I do, I have to imagine that this is going to be presented to my audience and I won't be there for them to walk them through it. And how do I do that? That means I have a lot of user behavior, user experience, and audience analysis that I have to process each time I do my work as essentially a product manager for the e-learning team. For marketing, I work tangentially with our own marketing department because who better to market the product than the person who made it? So essentially, I do a lot of the basic copywriting stuff to create the scripts that the marketing then takes and applies companies' guidelines to that. But before we even get to that point, I go into my own Word document and brainstorm. Okay, what's great about this? What are things we want to talk about? And because I've worked with marketing for quite a few times now, I know exactly what they come back and ask for. I know exactly what to give them, and I know what best to do to make their jobs easier. Because the more times they have to come back to me, the less time I have to work on the product.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. So, one of the reasons why I asked this question to Colin, and him and I had actually communicated via email before today's session, was because he does have the marketing related experience. It just isn't very apparent on the resume itself. So I designed this question for anyone who may be applying for a role, or maybe you got a referral and you don't have the necessary background that matches exactly what the job description is, but you actually do have the experience either directly or indirectly. You're going to want to be able to kind of craft that into a story and give the interviewer or hiring manager confidence that you can do essentially what they're looking for. And Colin was able to hit that. And that's kind of why I was smiling and smirking as he started to mention about how he works with marketing and actually does kind of write some of the copies himself, which is really what the interviewer is going to be looking for, which is perfect. I think to enhance the answer, I would have talked a little bit more about the marketing results or like sales sales results or things like that, right? Like give a little bit of information about like, look, I have been working with marketing for quite some time now. I've even been writing, initial copies for them. And for example, I wrote this one online copy and I don't know, we sold 20 different learning products in a week or something like that, right? Just give it a little bit more business context to kind of basically show them that, look, I can do marketing as well, even though it's not my formal job title, right? Cool. Awesome. All right, let's see. What are we in here? This is a great resume to explain how you will translate your instructional design into marketing. Huh, that's a great compliment.
Thank you.
Cool. Activated instead of even saying action or
I
emails
feel like I'm
issues.
missing context for some of these.
Oh, well, I believe all of these comments stay at the bottom even when the recording is over too. So we can always read back through these and make sure we're not missing anything. But great work so far, Colin.
Okay. Well, thank you for giving me some interesting questions.
You're very welcome. Very, very welcome. And I also try and give different questions from week to week. So just for folks listening at home, we can change things up every once in a while. It doesn't mean that you won't get any of the questions that I've asked in previous weeks. I just like to give the audience, a little bit of a different flavor every week. Okay, next question. So Colin, how would your colleagues describe you?
Well, I know exactly how they describe me because it's the same thing I get from all 5 of them. They say that I have a can-do attitude. I am very easy to work with. I pivot on a dime, and I am extremely responsible, a bit too responsible, actually, by one person's definition. The reason that I can say that is because I work remotely with all of them, and I occupy a very interesting um, position where a lot of things need to go through me, but I essentially operate autonomously. Almost nobody has oversight on me because what I do is something that um, essentially I'm the only person that does it in the company. Sometimes there are deadlines, but my company knows that as long as they've told me what it is and alerted me the deadline and the priority level, it will get done. Um, that I've never said no, even if I think an idea might need to be tweaked. So sometimes projects are proposed to me that need to be done, and because it's proposed by someone who might not have my expertise in it, um, they uh, they usually get an email back from me where I say I understand why it needs to be done and the reasons it needs to be done. Here's how I think we should modify it to make sure it works in the way you want it to work, right? So there's a back and forth between me and the stakeholders involved to understand that I help them achieve what they want to achieve. And a little too much responsibility is because I take failures very personally, and I usually am the first to step up and say, "This probably was, messed up because I messed up at this step. Here's what I learned from it. Here's what I think I could do better next time. If anybody has any other feedback, feel free to roast me. Tell me what you thought I should have done. And if you see me do this anytime in the future, stop me and remind me what happened this time." Is usually what happens. So yeah, that's a summary of me. Very responsible, very can do, pivots on a dime and gets it done.
Okay, great. Now, my follow-up question was going to be, are there any um, areas of improvement that your colleagues may have for you? But luckily, Colin was already able to anticipate that question and walked me through his explanation of that. So that was perfect. Shows a lot of interviewing IQ because he was essentially able to anticipate what was going to come next, and it does make a really strong impression on whoever may be interviewing you. Um, now for this question itself, what it's essentially trying to do is understand obviously how it would be to work with you, but also they're going to be wanting to see certain characteristics or skills that may match either with their overall company culture or their values itself. So this is another one of those research questions which I had talked about, where you would want to do a little bit of research ahead of time, knowing what a company like Crunchyroll, either their work environment, their management style, or the culture itself, what they would essentially be looking for in a top talent person that they wanted to hire. So you would try and craft your answer to highlight some of those different values for that specific company overall. But it's always good to also have like a mix of obviously more positive stuff, and then be ready to answer the question about, what would be a potential weakness or a failure, something like that. And then always good to back up things with short and brief examples to show rather than tell. Right. The example I always give is whenever someone's like, "I'm smart." It's like, well, how do I know that you're smart? It's like, oh, well, I graduated, with a 4.0 GPA. So that would be like the difference of like showing me you're smart as opposed to just telling me you're smart, right? Okay, cool. So Colin, what
Yes.
do you like least about your job?
What my current job?
Hmm.
Okay. Endless pivoting, I think. Actually, no, that might not be the right way to say it. Um, the fact that I think a lot of operations depend on me and me alone, and I can't delegate it. Let me explain that. I am the creative content lead within e-learning, my department, which functions sort of as a startup under the e-driving umbrella. So there's obviously other departments, marketing, communications, engineering. They build the stuff. But within my e-learning team, I am essentially sort of running like a one-man show when it comes to the creative side. Um, and how I'm gonna deal with that is the fact that I essentially have to wear every single possible hat that falls under creatives. Um, in the past 3 years, I went from essentially a technical copywriter to an instructional designer to a creative manager wearing, all these different hats. I've had to evaluate voice talent. I have to write like my duties don't only involve writing. I direct on-screen film shoots. This is not something I knew I would have to do 2 years ago, much less um, realize that I'm the person on the set, on the filming, who has to call the shots. Um, I evaluate actors for their roles as host. Um, and sort of these are all things that take me away from what I thought was going to be the main role, which is just writing. So the reason I won't say I hate it, but more like there's never enough time. I have to direct, I have to listen to music for the intros and outros. I have to oversee animation. Sometimes I have to storyboard animation. Animation is not something I really did and ever had formal training in, but now it's something I sort of do all the time because we have to work with the animation team. And I'm the only person who knows what I want it to look like, and the company just trusts me to do it. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of hats, and I am essentially wearing 7 hats on a daily basis, and just sometimes it feels a little like I'm being weighed down.
Okay. Well, Colin, here at Crunchyroll, we are a small and nimble startup in itself, and we do expect everyone on our team to wear multiple hats. So while your main responsibility will be writing copy and handling marketing activities, you may have to, delve into operations every once in a while, maybe even help with filming a, YouTube video or some content and things like that. So, would you be open, knowing that our role has, similar types of responsibilities to maybe what you don't enjoy about your role today?
Oh yeah, I'd be excited to. Um, the reason I brought that up as something I hated is because it felt like I am in my current position, I'm left there drowning and paddling without any life support. Um, I'm not against wearing multiple hats, but it sometimes feels like there's no one else to rely on, even within my own department.
Okay, cool. So we'll end the practice situation there. Now, that was a question that I think I've never asked on the mock interview sessions before. It was one that I saw recently on a common common interview questions for Facebook roles, I believe.
Hmm.
And so I just wanted to try that one out. Albert immediately was like, "Oh, that's a good one."
I mean, it caught
That's
me by
pretty funny.
surprise, man. I've never been asked that. I've never realized I had to share that.
Yeah, it's kind of a trick question in itself, right? Like, you wouldn't want to down talk per se what your current role of the company is in like a negative light, and also you want to be careful of what you mentioned because in the scenario right now, which obviously is entirely fictional and made up, you may mention something that actually is a part of the role that they have right now. So you don't also want to accidentally kind of disqualify yourself per se from
Hmm.
a role that you may be highly interested in. Now, of course, if it's a deal breaker for you, right, and that role does have that responsibility, then that's also good to know upfront that, maybe this isn't the perfect role for you. But in the context of an interview, assuming you want to pass and get the job itself, you just want to be very careful about what you choose to highlight. And then always trying to essentially kind of uh, spin it in like a positive light, right? In terms of like, there are some things about my role because no job is perfect, right? I think we can all admit that there's always going to be at least one or two parts of it that you don't like, but as long as the 70 to 80% of everything else you do love, it kind of helps outweigh that, and I feel like that's how most jobs will be. But making sure that you're able to kind of spin your quote unquote negative of what you don't like about your job and talk about it either as like a learning experience or kind of like how you were able to gain some new skill sets that can that have turned out to be very valuable for you in the future or something like that, and how you can bring it to a company like Crunchyroll. Like when you were talking about, for example, oh, I didn't realize I had to be on set, evaluating talent and actors and directing things like that. You could maybe spin that, right, and be like, I wasn't a part of my job that I didn't think I would initially enjoy, but as I got the experience, I realized it was so valuable, especially when it comes to marketing, right? And how, whatever. Directing commercials can be so beneficial. And I feel like, I can bring this experience, especially to a company like Crunchyroll. Something like that, right?
Yep, that sounds like some good feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Let me double check the chat here, see what's going on. All right. Again, if you guys have any questions or you want us to go through any particular tough interview question that you've got in the past, feel free to put it down in the comments or the chat and we will run through those as well. Dun, dun. Okay, so we did some of the research-based questions. So now we'll dive into some of the behavioral and scenario-based questions. For everyone at home, these are the ones that use STAR technique. So situation, task, action, result. And I'm also giving Colin a little bit of a hint before we dive in here, as you can tell. Okay, so Colin, tell me about a time you had to work with different functions like marketing or other cross-functional teams to write a copy that produced a really good result for either your product or your business.
Okay, let me sort of give you the background of what happened and what was necessary. So as you heard earlier, I direct the film shooting of a lot of our e-learning videos. One of the problems with a global product is that the globe does not drive on the same side of the road. There's left-hand drive and there's right-hand drive. The person that it was responsible for figuring out how to minimize the different takes we needed for left-hand drive versus right-hand drive was me. Why did we have this issue? Is because when we VO something, we have the actors say, when you're on the left side of the road, something, or if you're on the right side of the road, something, 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 or left, you know, left-hand turn or right-hand turn. You see where this is going. We had to do a new take each time for the different in language because of the difference in cultural shift or cultural preference. This was an issue because marketing cared, because obviously you can't market a product to people if it's not built for them. The product team cared, the CEOs cared, and everybody was like, okay, we obviously want left-hand drive and right-hand drive. But for me, the problem was we were doing multiple takes just to get this left versus right thing. And it was, you have to redo the entire scene, perfectly copy it down to the exact, movements, and time it sometimes, purely because the actors had to say left hand versus right hand. And so I thought about this for the longest time. This was costing us money. This was costing us time. This was inefficient. And I thought about it for 3 days, and I essentially came back with this answer. And I asked a bunch of subject matter experts, and I said, why can we not just call it driver's side turn and passenger side turn, right? Like, why are we stuck with left versus right hand? And then, they discussed it for a day or two, and they came back with, this has never been done, but we're okay with it. It makes sense, right? And I essentially invented new language to solve this problem that marketing and product and the CEOs cared about and was costing us a lot of time and money. So essentially, from then on, in all my scripts, instead of left-hand turn or right-hand turn, I just wrote driver's side turn, passenger side turn, and we've been gravy ever since.
Awesome. Okay. So what I like about this answer is the the creativity behind it itself. And I think what Colin is essentially trying to highlight here from his experience in a very humble way, right, is like, I'm able to solve complex problems that other people have not been able to with very simple solutions. And from a product or marketing perspective, I think that's a really valuable skill set. So definitely wanted to give Colin that acknowledgement up front. So well done. Well done there, Colin.
Thank you.
Overall, the structure of the answer, right? So let's start with that. So situation, task, action, result. It was all very easy to follow. He gave a lot more context on the situation itself before diving into the specific task, which is totally fine because some situations are more complex, especially given, Colin's field and kind of like he needs to explain, right, like why left versus right really matters. And then the action is what itself was also very, very easy to follow. And then the result was essentially saving the company both time and money and also delivering a great product, I assume. I think the R would have been really good with maybe like a little bit of an idea of how much money and time you had saved, but even more than that, right, is talking a little bit more about the results of your work, right? Like, does it turn out that because you called it passenger side and driver side turn, it turns out that you were able to sell even more or sell even less, or like people were buying more, or I'm not sure how your e-learning product is distributed or whatever it may be, right? But like I think you're understanding the gist of my
Yeah.
suggestion, right? Because we're trying to translate Colin's essentially like product writing or technical writing experience into marketing, which is kind of what he's applying for in this specific fictional interview, right? So you need to frame it in the context that would be valuable for someone in marketing, right? So that's just my only tiny suggestion there.
Yeah.
But rest of the answer was great.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Cool.
I'll keep that in mind.
All right. And looks like Albert has lots of comments here. I'm trying to read through some of these here. Don't be too vulnerable in your answer. That gives them the way to say no. You need to share just enough, but not too much. Oh, okay. I think Albert has crafted some practice questions for you here.
All right. Which one are we tackling?
Let's see. It's funny. Some of these are actually one of the other are actually some of the questions I had wrote for you. So let me pick one that I didn't write for you.
Okay.
That doesn't sound like one that Albert wrote. Let's go with this one. How do you know you're a good content creator? How do you judge good content? Or in this case, let's say copy, like marketing copy. How do you judge good marketing copy?
I think it depends on what the marketing copy was set out to do, right? Obviously, if you have a good idea of what the objective was, you can set good KPIs and OKRs for it. Did it achieve what you wanted? For example, if you wanted said marketing copy to, get more leads or people to click on something, those are easy metrics to find. Um, Whether or not it works, as there's a business answer and there's the actual writer answer. The writer obviously has an idea of how something's supposed to be interpreted by the reader, and the business doesn't care how it's written as long as it works. So sometimes you have things that seem like they work on the business side but don't work on the writer side. On in some cases, it's the exact opposite. There's many things that the people who make media have to consider, from medium to delivery to the message, to things that like social cultural. This is unbelievably important, but social cultural stuff always matters when you're trying to deliver marketing. The most famous story is when Coca-Cola moved into Asia, but their translation was horrifyingly against cultural taboo, and they spent a lot of money fixing that. So, how do you know whether or not it works? The question needs to first be evaluated with what does it set out to do, um, and obviously, did it do what it did, for the business? Because ultimately, the business need usually takes precedence over the writer need. If it works, but the writer has no idea how it's working, the business is usually saying, whatever, just give us more of whatever is working, even if you don't know what it's how you did it. How the writer needs to evaluate is as many metrics that you can be given as possible. Testing, beta testing with people uh, close to the subject matter, for example, subject matter experts. But then you also need to test with people who have nothing to do with the subject, because subject matter experts have a very different understanding of whatever you're trying to say versus people who have, just a layman or topical understanding of the topic. Does that answer the question?
For the most part. Now, based on your experience, right, and what you've seen, what are what are some examples or techniques, maybe is the appropriate word, for a really good marketing or sales copy?
Um, a good example of marketing or sales copy. Do you drink vitamin water?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen on the back of vitamin water, they have those little blurbs?
Mm-hmm.
Someone paid someone to write those blurbs. How do you measure the marketing of those blurbs? But the interesting thing with vitamin water is that wasn't a one-time thing. Every single bottle has a blurb that was clearly, specifically someone set out to write it. A decision was made that we're going to have this really weird blurb, and we're also going to pay someone for it. And how they arrived at that conclusion was, one day I was at Safeway and I was watching someone else buy vitamin water, but it was a kid. He was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I watched him as he picked up the vitamin water. He was reading the back of the blurb, and then he was smiling the entire time. And then when his mother came to say, "Do you want that?" he says, "Yes," but he was still reading at it. And that told me that whatever, and I have no idea like how you measure whether or not that worked, but I can tell you definitively that I have seen it work, and that I believe the fact that they're still doing it means that they have data proving that whatever is going on and how it's working, this thing works and it helps sell the product. Um, and that's my example of something that's working. It's creative. It's hard to measure why it's successful, but the fact of the matter is, I bet that at one point they probably tested not having it and sales plummeted. And they went back to, okay, we don't know why it's working, but without it, it's not working. So we're going to go back to making sure it's working with the thing we don't understand. I'm pretty sure Vitamin Water themselves can tell you a lot more about why it's working, and I have some ideas of what I think is working in that space in that moment. Um, and it has to do with the humor, the brand that and the feeling that vitamin water is trying to give you when you consume their product. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. Of course, I don't work for them, but I'm going to guess that all those things put together help vitamin water's brand and brand message.
Okay, good, good. Definitely a tough question. Albert has lots of follow-up questions here for you, but so he asked, but what if you don't have a chance to measure it? What if you have to hit it on the nail before go live?
Knowing something's a really good copy.
Yeah.
Um, you can't test it with like a beta alpha audience. You can't A/B test it.
Let's just assume you can't.
If you can't test something and like not even within the company, that's very tough. If you can't test copy before it goes live, you sort of have to fall back on training and evaluation. Like, it's going to not break grounds. Then that means you can't break grounds. You can't really test anything new. You have to fall back on what you know, which is what's worked in the past. What are the things that worked? You have to evaluate it critically. Like after you read it, does the message work? Is the message fitting with the medium? Because those are things you can evaluate even without metrics. Um, what is the intended audience? Because if you were set out to write something for an intended audience, let's say, Bay Area tech professionals, those audiences generally fish a predetermined psychodemographic, and you know what that sort of audience responds to. You can gear yourself towards that. So you basically try to maximize all the tick boxes that will tell you this thing, even if it's not unbelievably successful, is good enough, right? You're trying to maximize the good enough parts, and you throw it together, and then if you can't test it, that sucks. But maximize what's good enough. Is your message on point? Is your message fulfilling the medium? Is your message going to resonate with the audience? If you can do all three of those things, I believe that even if it's not successful, it's going to be good enough.
Okay. We will see if those answers appease Albert. We'll have to check the chat there afterwards. But for the general answer itself, I think one thing to add is Colin did a really good job of breaking down the process itself, right? Like if this was a hypothetical or scenario-based question where we were like, imagine we hired you and you to write a copy from scratch or whatever, right? He did a really good job of breaking down the process, which is research-based, very data-focused, et cetera, and how he would go about A/B testing, arriving at multiple different options, et cetera, et cetera. So he was very strong and heavy on the process side. The part that I was probing and pushing Colin on was also pairing that with his own experience, because that's what they are essentially hiring and paying and choosing someone as a candidate over another candidate for, right? Is your experience itself writing copy, which is why I was asking the follow-up question of like, well, like what have you seen or what have you done from your own experience that has been successful from a copy perspective? So it would have been really good if Colin had mentioned an example. I mean, the vitamin water one itself was really good and a strong story, but it would have been really good if Colin had talked about like a copy he wrote for his product and how well it did, and then some of the attributes as to why it worked so well. Obviously, because he was the one who wrote it, that's what is going to help him stand out as the candidate that they pick, right? Because if two candidates are basically just going to do the same process, then how would I pick this one over this one, right? Because if you're both going to do research and you're both going to do A/B testing, then like I could just hire either of you, right? So then what do you bring to the table that this one doesn't? It's going to be your experiences and the previous copies that you've written, right? So that's kind of what they're going to be looking for in their interviews, if that makes sense. Alrighty, and that is a perfect segue into our other hypothetical question. Let's see. It kind of hits the same one that Albert just asked. Let me see if I have another one. Okay, I have one. Are you ready?
Sure.
You're doing great, by the way, and we're almost done. I only have this one and maybe one more.
Let's do it.
Okay. And then we'll go back to another question that Albert has. So imagine you and another copywriter were working on a copy together. And again, I have no idea if this thing actually happens in real life, but I'm just creating a random
Sure.
scenario for you to, practice. So imagine you and someone else are co-writing a copy together, right? How
Mhm.
would you manage the project overall, knowing that there's two creative minds? And what if you both can't agree on a particular concept?
Okay. So this was an experience with Amazon last year. Amazon asked my company to create a giant e-learning course for their delivery associates training program, and my company agreed. What happened was that I threw together a giant outline of things that, you know, Amazon handed us a list of tick boxes that they wanted, of course. And based on those tick boxes, I drafted up an outline. And Amazon took that within their logistics department and said, okay, this is what we want changed, this is what we want, modified, yada, 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 yada. So in this case, we have me, the main writer, and Amazon, the, I guess, Sue writer, um, because while none of their logistics department was there as the writer, they wanted a say in what was going on and had an idea, a different vision of what they wanted, even if sort of as the as Amazon, they didn't really know what they wanted. They just knew that they wanted these checkboxes hit. So there's a lot of back and forth, and ultimately, what needs to be done is to agree on a certain set of outcomes. That way, no matter what happens, no one can get off track, and everyone sticks to the same outcomes. So clearly, Amazon during this time, I knew what was happening because 3 weeks before that, the New York Times had just published a bunch of horror stories about Amazon delivery truck drivers hitting things and stuff like that. So obviously, the foremost goals with the main stakeholder, Amazon, was they wanted their drivers to become safer. They wanted, all these check boxes to be checked, which were designed to sort of give their delivery drivers um, the skills to be safe on the road. Um, and I knew that, I understood that, and at every point I just looped it back. Like if Amazon wanted something and I thought differently, I tried to understand what they were trying to accomplish, and then I tried to decide, okay, is there anything I can add to that? Because if what they were trying to accomplish, fulfills the objective, nothing wrong with that. If what they're trying to accomplish by my professional expertise is not going to fulfill the objective, I just say, I understand where you're going to or where you're coming from, but here's an alternative way to do it, and here's my reasons for doing that. And then I would each time I would come out with two drafts. One is the one that fulfills what they wanted, and the second draft is what I thought would have been better. And I just give it to them and just say, okay, here's two drafts. This is the one you wanted. Here's the one I created based on my reasonings laid below or above. Um, which one do you prefer? We'll keep the one you think does better, right? And this worked out great. Turned It took a lot of time and patience because Amazon, but ultimately this was when I worked with their quote unquote copywriting team in their logistics department, had a lot of pushback and a lot of disagreements over time, but we pulled through, and they've loved it ever since. And they actually asked for a version 2, which will be put to the top of my priority list someday.
Awesome. Okay. So overall, it was really good because, well, Colin had actually had this experience, so he was able to essentially turn the hypothetical scenario into a behavioral question, and then you could see him walk through like S, T, A, and R very, very nicely. And the R was obviously a positive and good outcome, so that definitely shows for the positive impact he's had for both his company, but as well as Amazon. The genesis of the question, or what it's designed to do, is to understand essentially how well Colin can play with others in a corporate environment. Um, Colin is the only person in his essentially department itself. So that's also why I crafted this question, was because that is something that the interviewer is going to want to know once Colin does his "tell me about yourself" speech and admits that he's essentially a team of one. So they're going to want to understand, okay, if I hire Colin and I put him in a team environment, how is he going to be able to handle working and balancing with different perspectives? And it seems like Colin is a very methodical and unbiased approach, right? Like giving his recommendations as to why, and then even taking the extra time to create two different versions, and then being okay with whichever one that they choose to select. And I think that was overall a really strong answer. So well done, Colin.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see here. Anything in the chat that is interesting? I think I'm really curious to know what Colin considers good and bad writing, especially since he's a former journalist. So I think this is just more of like a general question of like what you consider good versus bad.
Evaluating on what like metric? Like the message, the structure, the writing itself, the prose. Like there's so many different levels, right? You can have good prose with terrible messaging. You can have good messaging with terrible structure, and you could have, you sort of good writing, I think, is evaluated on so many different stratospheres, right? You have to have the good prose. It's hard. This is the basic stuff: spelling, grammar, punctuation, that stuff. If you have terrible spelling and grammar, you're not going to get the point in, right? If someone can't read what you're trying to say, your message isn't going to be delivered. Next is the message. What is the message? Do you have a message? Did you ramble? Did you talk about A and then jump to B and then back to A? Was it like a train of thought sort of messaging? That's usually a no-no. It might be a stylistic choice. It can be very interesting depending on the creativity. So some marketing can do this. I've seen marketing where they do that. Geico is very famous for jumping around with messages. Um, and then after that, medium. Um, where are you putting this? Is it on a billboard? Is it like a little sign? Is it a something like what? Is it a video? Is it a podcast? Everything has a different medium. And of course, structure. How did you structure your message? Did you lay it out like, strong message with a interesting middle and a strong conclusion, or is it like a weak start where you keep them guessing, you sort of bring them around and then you finally hit your main point and there's like, oh right, Geico. Anyways, so long story short, it's very hard to evaluate everything. The best way to understand whether or not something is good is to first understand what it set out to do. Like everything writing at its core, good writing is going to be propaganda at one point. But bad writing is never going to be good propaganda. And that's one of my yardsticks for measuring it. If I handed this to someone who was a child, could you convince them of something? Could you convince them that, the sun wasn't real, blah, blah, blah? How did you lay it out? If you couldn't do that, at one point you failed. The message wasn't clear. They couldn't read it. It was structured incorrectly that even a 9-year-old could see like your logic was flawed or something happened. Something happened at one point where even a 9-year-old couldn't understand it and you couldn't convince them. And if you can't do that, then I think you failed.
Mm.
Yeah.
Interesting. A very process-driven answer, Albert. That's so funny. Okay. I just have one more practice question. It's very similar to the other one we had asked before this last question, the one that Albert had essentially created, but with a bit more of a marketing twist to it. So,
Sure.
Colin, imagine you were hired here at Crunchyroll as our senior copywriter. And I asked you to write a brand new copy for a Instagram ad, right? Let's just say the purpose of the ad is to get more people, is to get new customers to enroll and pay for our Crunchyroll subscription. Okay. And you're in charge of writing our copy for an Instagram ad. Walk me through your creative process.
So I already know the objective, which is, marketing. So we're essentially trying to grow the audience user base. I know the medium is going to be Instagram, so that's limited to 3. It's usually going to be a picture. It might be a small video. There's going to be a caption. There's going to be hashtags, and there's most likely going to be a link. Whether or not it's going to be a paid or not on Instagram has yet to be determined. I'm going to assume it might not be paid. So ultimately, the first thing we have to do is sort of do the audience evaluation. What is the audience on Instagram there for? And Instagram is very visual. Instagram is a visual medium. People have, the scroll. So if you're scrolling down, you're only going to tap on the things that visually popped out and jumped out at you. So obviously, the first thing on my list before I even commit to writing is trying to decide what is my hook? What is my visual hook? How am I going to make someone tap on the small square so that it becomes a big square, and then look at what's going on and be interested enough to realize Crunchyroll posted it and there's a caption underneath. Maybe they can read it. Because if you can't even get to that point, no matter how brilliant the caption is, it's not going to be read. So you figure out the visual hook. Then I would probably work with the art department, or the marketing department to figure out, what are some visual things that we've created, and then I evaluate, okay, which one of these things would be best for the Instagram post. After that, we have the hook, then we have the meat. What is the message? What needs to be put in? How do I, increase the player base? So depending on the hook, it could be, you know, for instance, Crunchyroll recently came out with Tower of God, my favorite. So it could be a Tower of God still shot, or a Tower of God, 15-second video, and post it there. And we're gonna have to choose the hook. After we've chosen the hook, it has to be related to the hook to give it some context. So everything needs to pair it up with context and desired messaging, because I think that everybody subconsciously knows they're being marketed to. Everything good is propaganda. So if you know you're being marketed to, and you know that at a subconscious level it's propaganda, how do I get you interested in the message where come click this link, sign up now, free for a month or whatever? And the answer to that is you give things context. Um, if you see something, let's take this out of the Instagram for a second. It's like if you see a gym ads are always like, people working out and then displaying, perfectly muscle sculpted bodies. And the context there is, you too can be like this. Would you like to sign up for 2 months? Right? So you have to pair the context with the hook. And the context can be like, for example, using the Tower of God reference, come watch, Tower of God, for free on Crunchyroll, only on Crunchyroll or something, English subtitles, yada, yada, yada. And then, 2 weeks free subscription at the bottom. So what is the audience's journey from there, right? They see something that they might recognize, like the Tower of God still. They tap on it, it becomes big. It's, what they want. They scroll down, and then they see the context. You can watch this thing that you were interested in earlier at our place. 2 weeks free subscription. Use code, Colin Mo. And that's how I would go about creating said Instagram post.
Great. Okay. So overall length of time, that was really good. It was a tough hypothetical question, and it was process based, so it was meant to be a little bit longer. As you can tell, like the thought process and itself is sound, that Colin has essentially walked the interviewer through, and he was even able to pull in relevant examples, which is also really, really nice. Strong answer overall. The only thing I would add is a little bit more context and structure, and I think you were alluding to it at the beginning, but then it kind of got lost in the details as you were kind of working through like some of these examples. But just giving it a little bit of framing, right? Like, well, my creative process generally, I'm going to want to figure out three things, right? The first would be the image slash medium. The second would be the hook itself. And then the third would be, I don't know, measuring impact or results or something. And then go back through each of them and then walk the interviewer through like number one, number two, number three. And then you can wrap it all up in like a nice little bow at the end. I think that was, if anything, the only thing missing, but overall, very, very good answer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that is all I had on my end. All of my questions are done. Anyone in the chat have any questions or any tough interviews coming up, or anything you guys are curious about from an interview perspective? Please let us know. You can comment even after this video is over, you can like mention me or Albert, and then we'll be happy to dive back in and answer your questions. I also have a YouTube channel with like other interviewing tips and things here too, so feel free to check that out. But yeah, I'm all done. Thanks, Albert. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you,
All
Cory.
right. Thanks, Cory. I didn't know you had that YouTube channel. You got the whole video card thing going on there too with the text. If you want to share that again.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Very pop YouTube.
Thank you. I've been trying. It's just
I like
career
the one
shakers.
there where you've got like your thumbs up, or you're thinking, or you're giving the look. Oh my goodness.
I was
You got
trying.
everything figured out.
And as you can tell, I started filming some of these with COVID, and my hair is getting longer and longer, and I can't even cut my hair anymore. So that's the context there. But Albert got a nice haircut, and that was being really commented in the chat. So that was awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you both, Cory and Colin. I appreciate both of your time as always tonight. And for those of you who watched and are watching here till the very end, I also appreciate you spending some time with us this evening, and I hope you walked away with some really good nuggets for your job search. Extra props for Colin for coming on here and sitting in the hot seat and offering to be a part of this. I know it's even I know I was asking some questions that I would probably have to think about, as far as, how do you test writing that's untested, or how do you know whether your writing is good or not? And so this is what makes interviewing hard, is because you literally have the entire gauntlet of an infinite number of questions, and you have no idea what will come at you. All right, so we're also continuing to help you through this job search with more content. So today's Monday, and so we have 4 more days left in the week. Tomorrow, we're going to speak to Martin McGinnis, founder of Access Bell, also Forbes 30 Under 30, and a marketing manager at Google. So he's one of Cory's colleagues here. He'll be telling you about how you can get closer to your next job by having the right conversations in just 15 minutes or less using the Access Bell app. We'll be hosting this on our Facebook business page, so Albert's List, not Albert's Job Listings and Referrals, the Facebook page. So we invite you to join us there, ask your questions, and see what you can do to get into your next job via networking, because it's harder than ever with so much talent on the market right now. Before then, we'll see you in the community with your introductions, your advice, and your success stories. Until then, take care of yourself, stay on the grind, and good luck with everything out there. Good night.
Cheers.